Whisper Nation, if you're listening to this on Spotify, that means you are getting another free preview of our Week 4 matchup show. This is part 1. But if you want to continue to listen to this beautiful, beautiful piece of content where we dive into every fantasy relevant player in every single game, you're going to need to head on over to patreon.com and subscribe to the Fantasy Whisperers over there for either the $1 or $5 tier. And this is a deal of a lifetime. You want to get over there, patreon.com, search the Fantasy Whisperers today.
Yes, we're back again.
Hey, let's pump up the volume.
Right here.
What's going on, Whisper Nation? It's Big Travie here and the rest of the Fantasy Whispers as we dive into our Week 4 matchup breakdown, Part 1, and we are going through every single fantasy relevant player in every single matchup in Part 1 and in Part 2. I am your host, Big Travie. You can find me on Twitter at BigTravieTFW. And today I am joined, as always, by Austin Sear. Austin, ARC, the man in the tank top. You can find him over on Twitter at Austin_R_Sear. Austin, how you doing, brother?
I'm really excited for this slate of games, man. I'm doing great.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and then on the other mic, we've got Johnny Game Time Hicks. You can find him over on Twitter at Johnny_Game Time. Johnny, how did your Week 3 treat you?
Well, Patty Mahomes was very, very fun to watch, I'll tell you that. But it was hit and miss. That was also my week 3.
Hit and miss seems to be the MO for fantasy football.
Exactly.
And on the other mic, the fourth and final member of our panel tonight is Summy. You can find him on Twitter at SummyTFW. Summy, what's going on, man?
Chilling, man. Just hanging in there. Super excited to jump into, like Austin said, this slate of games. I think Week 4 is a really good week to dive into, and I can't wait to give our listeners all the juicy insight.
Yeah, so don't just stop it right there. So we all know what you're saying. You were so geeking out because you said we finally have all this data. We finally all have this data, and we can actually give awesome back insight on why we come up with what we come up with on the show. So
yeah, the listeners definitely want to stay tuned right now because there's a lot of data heading your way, and it's going to help a lot in your start-sit decisions, and not only that, your rest of season outlook for some of these players too. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. If they gave out a doctorate of data, Summy would be one that held that certificate for sure, and we will dive into a lot of his juicy nuggets today. Before we get started, a little bit of piece of news here. Tennessee and Minnesota are under some COVID protocols right now. They're working from home, not participating in any in-person activity, and that's because there were a few COVID tests positive within the Tennessee organization. So monitor that closely. We'll discuss both teams' games here, and Adam Schefter saying some games could be moved to Monday, some games could be moved from this week. So make sure you guys are paying attention to that, looking at the lineup, and staying with the Fantasy Whispers, liked and subscribed over to us over on YouTube, and we will give you all the information as it comes to us. Guys, before we get going, go for it.
I just want to say, keep in mind that listeners, we're actually recording this on Tuesday, so the news actually just broke this morning. So if anything changes, please, stay tuned with Adam Schefter, all those Ian Rappaport, all those major news breaking guys to stay up to date on the information. Things could get flexed out, games could get postponed or forfeited. We don't know as of yet, so we'll try to provide the best we can.
Absolutely. And so before we get started and getting into these matchups, guys, I wanted to start off like we do most shows with a little bit of rest of season rankings on a few positions. Summy, I'm going to start with you. We look at the quarterback position. Quarterback 6 is Aaron Rodgers. Quarterback 7 is Cam Newton. And quarterback 8 is Matt Ryan. For the rest of the season, look, there's a lot of stories here. Cam Newton's rushing ability. Can he stay healthy? We've got Matt Ryan and just a god-awful defense that allows him to throw for monumentous, proportions every week. And then you've got Aaron Rodgers, that bad man on a revenge tour right now. So give me a ranking in these three guys, who you would like rest of season and why.
Boy, this is tough because Aaron Rodgers has just been on a tear, and it doesn't look like he's stopping anytime soon. And I'm really torn between Aaron Rodgers and Cam Newton as, my first option here. I do think I'm going to take Cam Newton here, though. And the reason I say that is because, the rushing floor is there. He's getting the goal line opportunities to score. He leads the team in rushing and rushing touchdowns. And I expect that to continue. Sure, he did put up a dud game last week, but at the same time, his ceiling is so high. We know what Cam Newton can do. Whereas Aaron Rodgers, I don't really trust him to sustain his level of production all season long. It's impressive what he did without Devontae Adams last week, but still, I'll take Cam Newton over Aaron Rodgers, and then Matt Ryan will be last.
I think I would agree with that just because of the rushing upside of Cam Newton. You pegged it pretty beautifully there. Austin, on the other side, we've got the running back position. We've got running back 10 is Austin Eckler. We've got running back 12 in Kareem Hunt, and running back 14 in CEH. So the storyline here is, right, running back 10, Austin Eckler, sitting there with who knows what's going on at the quarterback position. Who knows if he's going to continue to get the receiving work we like him to see. Is he a sell high? You've got Kareem Hunt in a backfield that's split with Nick Chubb. He is the 1B, but he's in a very voluminous rushing attack. And then you've got CEH, the first-round pick in fantasy, who seems to be a little bit not so great in short yardage, but a great slasher and on a very high-powered offense. So rest of season, who are you taking here?
Rest of season, I am going with CEH number 1. I'm going with Austin Eckler number 2, and Kareem Hunt number 3. And here's the breakdown on those three. CEH is someone who can benefit from all aspects of the running back position. He's going to be getting the ball between the tackles. He's going to be getting it on early down work, third down work. He hasn't been great on the goal line, but he still did get attempts on the goal line. So he's still a factor there. And I believe Andy Reid wants to have CEH be the guy as long as he's got enough breath in his lungs to be the guy on the field. He's also playing for arguably the best offense in the NFL, creating massive holes because that defense is never going to load the box, given how many weapons Kansas City has on their offense. My next choice was difficult between Eckler and Kareem Hunt. I believe that Kareem Hunt is the better all-around running back. I think he's one of the more explosive and elusive running backs in the NFL. Austin Eckler's not bad, but I don't think he's exactly on Kareem Hunt's level. However, the opportunity for Austin Eckler is superior to Kareem Hunt. Austin Eckler is getting, last week he had 11 targets thrown his way, and he's also pushing for 20 touches. So he's getting a ton of volume. Even with Josh Kelly over there, Austin Eckler's getting more touches on the ground, and he's getting more pass attempts through the air, which is not the same story for Kareem Hunt in Cleveland, given Nick Chubb, who is running at a world beater pace. Even with that 1A right there, Nick Chubb is locked down that job. Kareem Hunt, as good as he is not going to be taking the early down work away from Nick Chubb. And so Kareem Hunt's ceiling does have a cap on it, but what he's going to be able to do with those 10 to 15 touches, combinations of rushing and passing, is going to be really, really good. So you can't go wrong with any of those three, but that's my order.
Johnny, I wanted to kick it to you for the wide receiver position, and we've got a bunch of hamstrings in this one. I wanted to group it by hamstring. So there is a variance in the scoring here, but Devontae Adams is wide receiver 14, got a hamstring that kept him out of the last game. Julio Jones, same issue, hamstring, kept him out of his last game at wide receiver 53. And then coming back from a hamstring injury is Kenny Golladay at wide receiver 78. So there are questions in these offenses. There's questions with these players' hamstrings, but rest of season, who do you feel more confident with going forward?
I might surprise a few people here with my answer, but I'm going to go with my number one choice here for the rest of the season would still be Devontae Adams. I think that they kind of figured that they had a good chance to win this game without Devontae Adams, and it wasn't worth risking his injuring any further. So I believe that he will be back by this Sunday's game, this Monday's game, and it's against Atlanta, where he will feast and pick up right where he left off. So Devontae Adams is number one for me. Where it might vary from most people is I would actually rank Kenny G second, and then I would actually have Julio Jones third, which a lot of people might be freaking out and saying, how could you do this? But when I'm looking at the situations, right, Kenny G is going to step in and he'll be the number one option, target option in that offense, and it's looking like they have desperately needed Kenny G back. You look at where Julio Jones is at, and we have to say it. You have to call a spade and say, I don't know where his touchdowns are going to come from. We've already seen it throughout his whole entire career, lack of touchdowns. And then now you have even more people coming up. You have, Gage. You also have Calvin Ridley, who's taken like every single touchdown, it seems like. And then you also have Hayden Hurst in the passing game that Julio has to deal with. And so that's why I would put him third in this ranking. But I do still think that he'll finish top 7 in the season. It's not to say I think he completely falls off. It just with these three guys, that's how I would rank them.
Well, I thank you all for your input on our rest of season rankings. I know the fans are probably appreciating it as we see people kind of placed in different spots together within 3 weeks worth of football. As things change quickly, we wanted to give you our rest of season outlook on a few players. But that gets us started on our week 4 slate of games, part 1. And the first one's a doozy. If last week had a ton of great matchups for football fans, this week is looking a little bleak. And it starts on Thursday night as the New York Jets host the Denver Broncos in a whopping 40-point over-under, with the New York Jets actually favored in this game. I had to double take. Somebody told me they were favored, and I couldn't believe it. But the Jets are favored here in this 40-point over-under. And so, Austin, when we look at the Denver situation, what's piquing your interest from that higher-level view?
Well, it's easy to be sarcastic when it comes to this game. It's easy to make fun of a lot of these players that are going on, but I have to remind the audience, any given Sunday, these are professional athletes, and there is no or Thursday or Monday or Tuesday, given the COVID world that's going on. Yeah. Any given week, any one of these NFL players can play really good football. These are all professionals, so I wouldn't sell this game short. And we've got new players that we're looking at with Brett Rippon, who's going to be stepping in because of the injuries. Melvin Gordon should still be leading the way as Philip Lindsay's getting right. We've got Jerry Jeudy, the rookie, who's now going to be leading the way with Cortland Sutton and his shoulder injury. And then Noah Fant, who has been a breakout tight end candidate, done really well in the early starts to the season. So there's a lot of young talent that I'm excited to watch here, especially on the pass catching side of the ball, specifically with Noah Fant and Jerry Jeudy. And hey, let's see what Rippon can make happen. It's an opportunity for somebody to step up and become a household name.
Johnny, how confident are you in Brett Rippon to get some of these guys going?
Not very confident. He came in at the end of the game on Sunday, and he looked decent. He completed the vast majority of his throws, but at that time, the game is kind of in hand. Also, he's a new quarterback coming in, so I don't take a whole lot of water or put a whole lot of weight into what we saw in that game. This team, the Jets, will be prepared for this quarterback. And to be honest with you, I think this is going to be an ugly game. I give Austin props for saying, you got to give credit where it's due. These guys are professionals, and I do. They are professional athletes. But, man, this is not much to get exciting here. You're starting Melvin Gordon as a flex option at best. You don't really like too much after that. And then I think you can throw out all these wide receivers as wide receiver 3s or flex options. Even Tim Patrick, you look at what he's been able to have a TD connection with whatever quarterback is throwing the ball. So if you have to take a dart throw on him, not a bad option there, but the guy I would like the most or has the most upside for me on this side is not Jerry Jeudy. It would be KJ Hamler, who's seeing 6.5 yards per target, but he's getting 13 yards per reception, which means he gets the ball in his hands and then he does work. He creates space and does magical things. So I like that aspect of it. And Noah Fant, you're just smashing, dude. This is a for sure start.
Yeah, like I was just going to bring up the fact that if New York's number 13 against the run, they're number 32 against the pass. So this would be the way to attack them. Do you agree with Johnny that it's KJ Hamler, the one you're having the most confidence starting of those 3 wide receivers?
Yeah, it's not about the confidence, right? It's more about the upside that's there. And KJ Hamler, we know his ADOT's going to be up there. Lower percentage plays, which doesn't give me the most confidence, especially with a third string quarterback in play. So I don't think he has the most upside this week or even next week, at least until Drew Lock gets back. But I would take the shot on KJ Hamler over Tim Patrick, who's averaging less than 1 yard per route run. He's just a volume play at this point because this wide receiver core is so banged up. But KJ Hamler is definitely the guy with the most upside.
Austin, when we look to the home team, the New York Jets on the side of the ball, they are the favorites here. But for fantasy football purposes, is there anything you could be that's piques your eye here?
Anything here that piques my eye, the man asks. Well, we know that opportunity is king, and I expect Frank Gore to be getting a lot of opportunity. But like somebody brought up last week, the man hasn't. The man averages about as many yards per carry as age that he is. He's 37. He gets like 3.7 yards per carry, if that. I think that's going to keep going. We've got Braxton Berrios leading the way at the wide receiver position, given the injuries we're dealing with in Crowder and Rashad Perriman. Chris Herndon should be the one that we'd be looking towards, but under this Adam Gase system, it's been real dink and dunk, and nobody's getting unleashed. And I'm really trying to put a positive spin on this outlook here, and Adam Gase makes it difficult.
Well, Johnny, Austin's not very confident in anything going on here, but there is a situation that we have to talk about, Braxton Berrios, and maybe Jamison Crowder if he can get back here. What is your confidence level in starting either of these? Because I would think the rest of the Jets offense is a complete fade for us.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, if Crowder can give it a go, I'm still. If he becomes a wide receiver 3 for sure, or a flex option, because we've seen Sam Darnold has to throw to somebody, but you're not confident in it. Like, you're not excited to get someone like that in your lineup. But Braxton Berrios has been the guy that Sam Darnold has been looking for. He's been he's seen 12 targets over the last 2 games. Played the vast majority of the snaps, so he is I just don't see the high upside with any of these players, unfortunately, and that's why I tend to stay away. But for a deep stash, I do want to mention before we move on, because there's not a lot in this game, but a deep stash, one of those like, hey, just stick him on your bench because it's a Thursday night game, would be LaMichael Pirine. He actually saw a very close amount of carries as Frank Gore, and we already know what Frank Gore is. We've seen it. Most coaching staff would say, hey, let's get the rookie in there to see what he can do before you get Le'Veon Bell back. But again, Adam Gase is the head coach of the Jets, and I have no idea how he still has a job, so we'll see how that goes.
All right, moving on to our next matchup in a much higher over-under, maybe a little more exciting, I'd say. 54 points in this over-under when Detroit hosts the New Orleans Saints. The underwhelming New Orleans Saints, you could say. New Orleans still favored in this one, though, by 4 points. Something, when we look at that New Orleans side of the ball, I know you've been saying it for a few weeks, but really it's probably been a few years, and that's Drew Brees' arm. What are you seeing with him and the rest of this offense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you pointed that out. We were speaking last year, and I kind of said the same thing, and even the year before that. I mean, Drew Brees, towards the end of the year, his arm just looks like a noodle, and it's not good that that he started out this year exactly just like that, Travi.
Noodle arm 2.0.
Well, listen, Drew Brees, he has, I think, the second fewest deep passing attempts in the league right now. I think he only has 2 on the season. His ADOT is the lowest amongst all starting quarterbacks. He's without Michael Thomas. Hopefully he gets him back this week. I think he could still do some damage with Michael Thomas back, but an Alvin Kamara screen pass that goes for 60 yards to the house is not going to happen every week. So you got to be concerned here about Drew Brees. Well, we don't. It might just happen because Kamara is the RB1 on the season right now. And in hindsight, if you took him over Christian McCaffrey, like, people would have called you stupid. But he's paying off, and he has the second most fantasy points by a running back ever scored within the first 3 weeks. So that's really impressive by itself. And I think, that sustains because he's going to see the target market share. So I'm really curious to see how this offense looks like after Michael Thomas comes back. Is it just kind of like, back to business? Like, are they going to keep winning games, or, are they still going to struggle? So, I mean, you tell me, John, Travi. I mean, what do you think about Drew Brees? Like, what do you feel about the offense?
I think it's a popular thing to talk about Drew Brees' noodle arm. He's had the lowest wide yards per attempt, 7.3 since 2005 with the Chargers, but he still has an adjusted completion percentage of 81.4, and he gets to throw to Alvin Kamara, like we just said. So you like that part of this offense. You like him getting Michael Thomas back, and you like that Detroit is giving up 21.4 points to the QB, which is 8th most on the year. So I'm okay with you firing up Drew Brees here. I think that's actually a good spot for him, plus this monster over-under. You talked about Alvin Kamara. I mean, he's the RB1 by 10 points right now, and then you get a Detroit team allowing 184 scrimmage yards per game to the running back. Fire it up. It's going to be great here, I think. And then we've got to talk about this wide receiver situation, because we mentioned the average depth of target, the yards per attempt for Drew Brees, and that means Michael Thomas is sitting there coming back from this high ankle sprain in a spot to just smash on that market share, because this is a guy who runs completely masterful slant routes. The report from Adam Schefter was that MT was eyeing a week 4 return. He'd be likely to walk into that market share. But if he can't go, I actually do like Emmanuel Sanders in this matchup. Detroit has surrendered 4 touchdowns to the wide receiver position, and he had 5 red zone targets now after last week's game on the year. So that's second behind only Alvin Kamara. Jared Cook would also get a nice bump for me if Michael Thomas were to not go, because anybody not named Alvin Kamara, Jared Cook leads the team in market share if you're not Alvin Kamara. So I kind of like what I'm seeing there. But, Sonny, when we look to the Detroit side of the football, we're getting Kenny Golladay back. Does that mean that you can start to get excited about this offense?
Yeah, I think I think Detroit's trending up, and people, going into last week, people were a lot lower than them than they should have been. And, I was funny. I was chatting with my buddies and I told them, listen, last year Detroit tied with Arizona in week 2 or week 3. And I feel like they have a real shot to beat them this year. And my buddy just looked at me and laughed. He's like, you're stupid. And lo and behold, look what happened. I mean, Detroit, they're a little bit more underrated, and I think they deserve a little bit more credit. They won
because Kyler threw the 3 interceptions. They didn't win that because they were the better team.
Right. But why did he throw those 3 interceptions?
Because he got aggressive. He was aggressive with where he was going, throwing the ball, and he felt himself too much.
So the reason why, yeah, absolutely, I totally agree with you there, Johnny. He definitely got more aggressive, and that's something that you like to see coming out of Kyler, right? Because he hasn't shown that aggressiveness. Like, he's just shown like he pulls the ball and he runs. So it's really good to see that he's trying to be aggressive and fit that ball into tight pockets. But I think the reason why he had to get aggressive is because Detroit was playing a lot of contain. They wouldn't let him really run the ball outside the edges, so they were forcing him to pass it into tight spots. And I think that kind of defense that can adjust to that type of quarterback, it's a good sign coming from the defensive side of the ball in Detroit. So
if they can kind of clean up the defense, which is something you would hope to see with Matt Patricia as the head coach, then you're liking what you could see for more opportunities for the Detroit offense. I think to your point there, Sonny, if I look at Matt Stafford, he's coming off his cleanest game of the year, and he's facing a New Orleans team that just has been recently gouged through the air. We know they're a good run defense, and we figured they would be a good all-around defense, but right now their 29th ranked pass defense is really hurting them. And so Stafford will come in here facing a team that, only Dallas and Atlanta have given up more passing touchdowns through 3 games with 8. So you look at what you see in Stafford, you look at him getting Kenny Golladay back, who, we were wondering if he would be limited. Kenny Golladay hitting on 73% of the team snaps when he came back. We love that situation. But really, I think the big hard-hitting questions, and the questions we'll probably get the most in DMs, is about this backfield, right? You've got Adrian Peterson at age 35. He's got 43 carries through 3 games. That's number 8 in the NFL. He's got 12 red zone rushing attempts. I know that New Orleans is still a tough rushing defense, but I don't mind flexing AP here because he's got touchdown upside. Like, if they can get the ball down into the red zone, he could fall into a touchdown here. If you look at the other guys, I'm fading Kerryon Johnson. I don't think anybody would blame you there. But DeAndre Swift is a guy that we came into the season wanting more out of, and he's been relegated to a passing game work with 8 rushing attempts in 3 games. You've got Kerryon getting 10 more rushing attempts, and then we mentioned AP, of course. I think you look at DeAndre Swift, you'd want that pass catching to get up, especially in PPR, but he's behind Amendola, Jones, Hawkinson, all of those guys in market share right now. And, I just don't know if I can trust DeAndre Swift. I think he's a guy you can kind of move away from. TJ Hawkinson is the guy I'm really excited about outside of Kenny Golladay here. Oh, go for it, Johnny.
Well, I don't think that people should. I mean, if you are 0-3, then yeah, move what you can, and you need to pick someone up. Then yeah, I would trade or get away from DeAndre Swift. But we have to look at this whole situation in reality as for what it is. And one, we know that they got lucky that they beat the Arizona Cardinals like they did. We'll give them credit. But Matt Patricia is his whole thing is defense. He has one of the worst defenses in the league. You look at Detroit's schedule over the next 4 weeks. They play Jacksonville. Okay, they can win that one. Atlanta, Indy, and Minnesota. Okay, if they don't win 3 of those 4 games, Matt Patricia's fired. So what happens when Matt Patricia gets fired? Well, the offensive coordinator is going to take over. And what does he like to do? He likes to pass the ball. Well, at that point, why would they keep Adrian Peterson around? They know what they have in him. Kerryon Johnson, we know. So then they would want to give Swift the ball. And just like last year, I talked about it. Miles Sanders, last year, how did he start the year? He had 3.2 fantasy points, 5.2 fantasy points, and then 10.6 fantasy points through the first 3 weeks. DeAndre Swift has outscored him in 2 of those 3 weeks for the first rookie year. We weren't saying cut Miles Sanders last year. We're not saying to cut DeAndre Swift. If you do that,
I am saying I think you can cut DeAndre Swift. I like your points. I love the context here, Johnny. I think you're making good points. But Darrell Bevell is the OC. And somebody's talked about how Darrell Bevell loves Adrian Peterson and would probably still lean on Adrian Peterson. And he doesn't necessarily love to throw the ball. He just started throwing the ball more voluminous with Matt Stafford. So I think it could happen. But I really like what I saw out of TJ Hawkinson here. If you're going to keep one of these guys, and TJ Hawkinson was maybe a guy you were looking at getting away from. TJ Hawkinson played 82% of his snaps in week 3. So he is ramping up, and he holds the lead of market share on this team. Now, obviously, Kenny Golladay was gone, but that's 16% market share. And for this specific matchup, I really like Hawkinson a lot because you look at the way Green Bay killed New Orleans on that play-action tight end bootleg last week, and I think it could be right there for TJ Hawkinson again this week. I'm really excited about his matchup in this one.
Moving on. I just want
to
add on one thing. I think, if you're like a James Conner owner and you're kind of like worried about the Steelers game, for example, or, let's say you're just in need of running backs. If you have Latavius Murray on your bench, I think Latavius Murray is a very sneaky start this week. New Orleans could very well get out ahead of Detroit, and Latavius Murray has just 2 less red zone rushing attempts than Alvin Kamara. He's still getting some work, and I think with Detroit giving up the most EPA per rush attempt in the league to running backs, I think Latavius Murray is also, he could find the end zone once or twice as well himself. So don't worry about starting Latavius Murray if you're in a pinch.
I guess I'll give you that one. I just didn't see it last week with Arizona. They had the same kind of opportunity for Edmonds to get more involved. And I think actually Detroit is keeping around with teams that maybe they shouldn't. And on the other hand, New Orleans is giving up to teams that they probably shouldn't a lot more. So I would be a little bit more.
I just feel like having Michael Thomas back is it's going to make a huge difference.
If they do have him back. Hopefully they do get him back. All right, moving on to the next game. We've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosting the Los Angeles Chargers. This is a 43.5-point over-under as we record this game. The spread is 7.5 favoring the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. When we look at this game, Johnny, we've got a bunch of things going on at the quarterback position, but that affects the other parts of this offense. So what are you looking for mostly with the higher level view here?
I'm looking for... Wait, I'm sorry. Are we on LA Chargers or Tampa Bay?
Chargers.
Yeah, sorry. I thought you said New Orleans Saints. I thought you said no. When I'm looking at the overview here for the LA Chargers, obviously Herbert is supposed to still be the quarterback there. So what is his continuous involvement with this wide receiver core? We've seen the uptick for Austin Eckler and guys like Keenan Allen. Will that continue, or is this going to be a thing where he starts to get more comfortable and more involved with guys like Mike Evans in this offense? So that's a major thing. And my other thing is now the time to sell high on Austin Eckler? He's had back-to-back good weeks. You have the rumblings with Joshua Kelly as potentially taking the goal line work. Where's the thought process for this, Austin, as far as this background or running back situation goes?
I think that the running back situation is what this team is really going to be built around. And I would be feeling pretty good about Austin Eckler. And now if you could sell on Austin Eckler right now and get a premium on him, anytime you can get a premium dealing out a player, I'd say go for it, even if that player is an elite player.
What would you take in return for him? Like, what would you accept for Austin Eckler right now? If someone offers you a trade, if I offered you, let's say, DJ Chark, and DJ Chark and like another wide receiver 3 or like a running back 3.
It would have to be a running back that has some legit upside that's coming along with it. I think that Austin Eckler is going to be getting involved in a lot of places around the field. Josh, and I'm somebody who was really opposed to Austin Eckler coming into the season, but Justin Herbert, I believe, really benefits Austin Eckler. When we look at what Justin Herbert is doing, this is going to relate to the halfbacks. I mean, Justin Herbert, he's throwing the ball down the field at a decent clip, 10 attempts in the last 2 games, but he's only completed 3 of those deep ball attempts, which is a really low percentage. He's at 4.7 completed air yards per attempt. That's number 29 in the league. To me, suggests a dink and dunk type of style. Now, he's still pushing 320 yards per game, which is nice. A lot of good dinking and dunking. He's got a couple of good dink and dunk players there in Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen. who the latter there has been absolutely feasting since it came in. We're talking 29 targets over the last 2 games. Last week alone, Keenan Allen had 19 targets, 13 grabs on those 19 targets for 132 yards and a touchdown. Big Mike Williams, I was a big fan of the man coming into this season, but he's a deep threat. And as we just mentioned, Justin Herbert is not right now a deep ball thrower. And so Mike Williams last week, 1 for 1 on 17 yards. He's got a hamstring issue right now. I think Keenan Allen is going to be continued to lean on. I think that Austin Eckler is going to be continued to lean on. And Joshua Kelly is a nice play, but I'm not concerned right now with his sub 4 yards per carry, with Joshua Kelly's number 49 on elusivity rank coming from Pro Football Focus Elite Stats. And his target attempts have just been disappointing. 0 week 1, 0 week 2, 2 last week compared to Austin Eckler's targets at 1, 4, and 11 last week. He hasn't carried the ball more per average than Eckler, and I don't think that's going to continue either. So I'm feeling all right about Eckler. I'm feeling all right there. And then the last person to mention here, another benefit of the Justin Herbert play style is Hunter Henry. Last week, he went 7 for 50, 15 targets the last 2 weeks. He's number 2 on the team in targets, tied with right there with Austin Eckler. But Keenan Allen's leading the show. So firing up a lot of these players, pausing though on Mike Williams, and Josh Kelly would be, if you have to start him, you can feel okay, but I'm not super excited about it.
Johnny, is most of your concern and your want to trade away Eckler at this point and sell high based on what you think Joshua Kelly is, or your lack of faith in Justin Herbert? Can you kind of frame what you're thinking with Austin Eckler there?
Well, yeah, it's just my concern is like the coaching staff has definitely voiced that they want to keep getting Joshua Kelly involved. They like him as a running back, and he actually has been producing pretty well for a rookie running back. So my concern is that it limits the upside of Austin Eckler. And I understand in certain game strips could determine whether Eckler gets more play, like in this one, where they were, needing to pass more. They were behind, which was kind of a surprise. But I think in run-heavy games or games where they're favored, which wouldn't indicate in this situation. Obviously, I think Tampa Bay is probably going to win this game. But in games where the game script could be positive, I think you'll see Joshua Kelly get the bulk of the carries, and that's where my concern is. I just think it limits his upside.
Do you think Austin Eckler is a game script dependent back that will have to be in games where they're not favored?
Yeah. So, like, for example, if I could go, somebody was asking, what would you do? If I could go to the Kenyon Drake owner and or whoever rosters Kenyon Drake, and I could trade Eckler straight up for Drake, I would do that.
That and Johnny, one other point I just wanted to add is, Anthony Lynn came out and said he criticized Justin Herbert after that first game where he looked good. And he said, listen, Tyrod's still our starter. When he's healthy, I'm going to put him back in. So, we see this offense take a step up in terms of, target share for Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler getting 11 targets last week. That happened with Herbert. That didn't happen with Tyrod. So if they go back to Tyrod, you're back with, an RB3 in Austin Eckler. And it's just you're stuck with him all season and you miss your opportunity to sell high. So the situation's kind of muddled, and that's kind of what's making me want to sell Eckler, because if Tyrod comes in, I'm not excited about this offense at all.
And I want
one guy you probably wouldn't sell. Oh yeah, go for it.
I want us to mention one thing on Summy's point, because that's a really, really good point. And I think it's important that when we look at this personnel dynamic, specifically with Tyrod Taylor, Justin Herbert, and Anthony Lynn, who's ultimately going to make this decision, it's important to look at how this ended up happening. Anthony Lynn is not oblivious to the fact of where Tyrod Taylor's status in the NFL is and the opportunity that he was given right now with a good offensive team in front of him with the Chargers, and then to have a medical doctor, a guy you trust to help you get right before you put your body on the line for the team, does you so dirty that it could take you off the field for potentially the rest of your career, right? I don't think Anthony Lynn is going to allow that to happen. I think that Anthony Lynn is sincere when he says this is still Tyrod's team. And unless Justin Herbert can do something really crazy, Tyrod Taylor is going to get that job back just because it's the right thing to do. And it's such a dirty thing to go the opposite direction on it. I think that if Tyrod Taylor is not good for Austin Eckler, you should expect Tyrod Taylor to be getting the starting job back, at least temporarily. Make your decisions on Austin Eckler as such.
Johnny, when we look at the Tampa Bay side of the football, what are some of the biggest things that you're looking out for? Because this is an offense that was supposed to be God-sent and lead us to a Super Bowl if you're a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan. But what are you seeing right now?
Well, I'm seeing a split backfield, and every single week we say that we should, in theory, start this guy, and it ends up being a different guy. I'm also seeing Gronk was actually used in the passing game, so that's a little bit interesting there. Is it here to stay, or is he here to block as an offensive lineman? I don't know. And then my third one is the Chris Godwin. What is that injury going to do to this offense? And so I want to ask Austin. He did a very nice deep dive. And so my question to you, are you starting Uncle Lenny? Are you starting Ronald Jones? What about Tom Brady? He actually had a decent game last week, throwing the ball, had 2 1-yard touchdowns to Mike Evans for some reason. I don't know. I'm not bitter or anything. But, yeah, so that's my question. Do you see Mike Evans becoming more involved in this offense?
I do see Mike Evans becoming more involved in this offense. I think that it's an issue of the team gelling, coming together, and developing that chemistry. Tom Brady is a 40-year-old quarterback playing for the first new team he's ever had. Bruce Arians has a new quarterback. They're working this system together. I'm really excited for the Tampa Bay players, and I think that you should be as well. It's got some question marks, though. Like Tom Brady, I would feel all right starting Tom Brady this week. They're going up against, as we said, the Chargers. It's going to be the number 13 ranked pass defense, which isn't great, but Tom Brady's getting Mike Evans and Scotty Miller, and I think he's going to be able to use them really well this week. Mike Evans looking at 4 red zone targets. I think we see a couple more. I think they're going to connect. I think this week Mike Evans catches a touchdown pass from Tom Brady, who's been throwing the ball deep down pretty good. He's tied for number 2 in deep ball completions over the last 2 weeks with 6. Tied number 4 in attempts, so he's going for it, and he's completing.
That doesn't make any sense, though. I thought Tom Brady was like a dink and dunk passer, 3 yards down the field.
It's a weird counterintuitive narrative, right? Like the guy actually throws the ball down the field more often than you'd expect, and he's actually pretty efficient at it, a lot more than his counterpart on the other side of the field in Justin Herbert right now through a few games. And Mike Evans is going to feast on that. And then on the dink and dunk side, Scotty Miller is going to be coming in. 5 targets last week, 3 catches, 83 yards. It's one of those plays. He's not going to be a world beater. He's not going to probably win you your matchup, but he could be someone you could plug in, probably still available, and it's going to keep a hole from forming on your team. In terms of the tight ends, like Johnny mentioned, Gronkowski came out. He was catching some passes, but so was O.J. Howard. I think if you had to start one of these guys, there's probably a better tight end option available. But both of them are, it's hard to say right now which is the go-to, given 8 targets in the last 2 weeks for Gronk, 7 targets for O.J. Howard. They finished 48 yards and 49 yards last week. 2 red zone targets last week, and then 3 red zone targets for O.J. Howard. They're really close. I would be looking another direction if you're looking for a tight end. Keep an eye out for Chris Godwin. His hamstring is making him doubtful for this week.
Just one thing, just 2 things actually. I just want to add on. Number one, Chris Harris. They're losing Chris Harris. I think he fractured his foot, so his defense gets a little bit softer as well. The secondary. So that's also a tick up for the pass catchers and Brady as well this week. Mm-hmm. And as far as like the tight ends go, like I really like personally, I really like O.J. Howard this week. He has the softest matchup when it comes to tight ends. He's going to be matched up against Kaiser White, who's allowed 83% completion percentage, 1.31 yards per route run. I think if O.J. Howard can see the volume, we saw Brady go into O.J. Howard all season so far, and I think that
that's what I got to ask, Sonny, because you're saying O.J. Howard here, but what gives you so much confidence that it's O.J. Howard over Gronk? Because now, like we pointed out here, Gronk 8 targets over the last 2 weeks. O.J. Howard 7 targets over the last 2 weeks. So isn't it looking like they cap each other's upside here?
No, because I truly believe that last week was really just like Bruce Arians trying to be sneaky. I think he like that was a full plan. Like, hey, Gronk, go out there, tell the media you're a blocking tight end. Go do that. Like we know Arians kind of messes with people. I think the true value that Gronk provides is still that run blocking, right? Like Tampa Bay, I think. Let me just double check here, but Tampa Bay, I believe. If I could just pull up this data here, Tampa Bay has the 6th best run blocking O-line, and Gronk adding to that just helps, boost the value of Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette. I think they value him as a run blocker. I really do think O.J. Howard is the primary tight end here. He's more athletic at this point in his career than Gronk is, and listen, I like O.J. Howard. If you lost like a Goddard and O.J. Howard is on your waivers, I would recommend picking him up. as like
the answer here is Mo Alley Cox. If he's on your waivers, you go pick Mo Alley Cox up. But I like the perspective there, Summy. We're moving on to the next game, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is a 48-point over-under with, I believe, Cincinnati is favored in this. Is that right? Yeah.
Over here? Yeah, it's Cincinnati.
Yeah,
by 3.
Cincinnati's favored by 3. It's basically a pick 'em. They're getting the edge because they're at home. When we look at the Jacksonville side here, Sammy, we've got Minshew looking for a rebound. We had James Robinson get introduced to the world on Thursday night prime time as really the only thing on offense you liked out of Jacksonville last week. And then we saw DJ Shark miss the game last Thursday. We're hoping that he gets back into the fold here because he is a big part of this offense, and we saw how it affected Minshew. So, Sammy, are you confident that Jacksonville can get it back going here, or do you think Jacksonville is just one of those teams we're never going to be able to peg what they can do on offense?
No, I think I don't know. I feel like they can be predictable if we know what the defensive side of the ball is going to be doing, right? And by defensive side, I mean the opposing team. Like if you look last week, right? Like Miami adjusted really well to what Gardner is weak at. And what Gardner's weak at is he's hesitant to throw the ball down the field. And if his pass catchers are covered, he's not going to throw into tight coverage. And he's going to scramble and he's going to take sacks. So we saw that kind of come into play last week against Miami. And this week against Cincinnati, I mean, listen, Cincinnati, they're a lot better in the secondary than people think. They're actually the third best secondary coverage unit in all the NFL. Surprisingly, you know, Darius Phillips, he's been improving every single game. William Jackson and Darius Phillips, they actually have allowed less than 1 yard per route run on all of their coverage snaps. The addition of Mackenzie Alexander has been huge for this secondary. But the one part, you know, that does give me a little bit of hope with Minshew is that Cincinnati actually ranks 31st in pass rush. So there is some hope for a decent bounce back game from Minshew, but DJ Shark has to be in the lineup for that to happen, right? Like we saw Chris Conley, he was dropping balls left and right. The chemistry is just not there between him and Gardner. So I think if Chris Conley plays, Gardner is like a fringe streaming option. I wouldn't drop him because his schedule does, you know, it gets easier as the coming weeks come with Houston, Detroit, and then a bye, and then Chargers after that. So not the toughest of schedules, but this week I do feel like it might be a continuation of last week where he might disappoint. So I wouldn't recommend him as a streamer if DJ Shark is out.
So that's the big caveat here. Shark's out. You can't really roll with Minshew, but if he's in, you like firing him up here.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it firing it up. I'd call it tempering expectations and slowly dipping your toe in the water. You know, seeing if it's warm.
Fair enough. Maybe more water than fire in this one. Going on the other side of the ball, we've got the Cincinnati Bengals. They're the home team here. And we've got Joe Burrow, Big D Joe, out there slinging the ball around. Just pass attempts out the wazoo here. We've got Joe Mixon, and the concern with Joe Mixon is real between those that have him, but he is still seeing somewhat bell cow usage within this offense. And then you've got the pass catchers, which is just kind of a jumbled mix of A.J. Green's volume but not being very good, Tyler Boyd needing garbage time to really make your games, and then T. Higgins coming alive last week. Sammy, is there anything you can peg down here? Are you excited about the Bengals?
Yeah, listen, I'm excited for the Bengals. Joe Burrow looks legit. I like him a lot for this franchise. And, you know, we'll cover the Bengals right now, and we'll go back to the Jacksonville skill position, like running backs and wide receivers as well. We'll give you guys some start set advice on those guys as well. But with Joe Burrow, I mean, listen, he's on pace to be the second most sacked quarterback behind David Carr. He's on pace for 75 sacks. David Carr got sacked 76 times. So that's also dangerous. I mean, for a development of a young QB, we expected this O-line to be a little bit more improved, but, you know, I truly believe sacks are a QB stat, so I think that'll improve. I mean, last week, if you look, Philly sacked him, I think, 8 times last week.
Yeah. That's
no surprise because Philly's actually ranked second in terms of pass rush, right behind Pittsburgh. You know, they have Fletcher Cox, they have that big D-line over there. So if Joe Burrow can have a little bit more pocket awareness and kind of avoid some of these sacks, I think he's just going to continue to keep getting better. He's QB 10 on the season right now, averaging 21 points per game. Jacksonville allows the 6th most fantasy points to QBs at 22.8. So I think he's an excellent streaming option this week. And I think, you know, he's not even a streamer. I think you can start him every week. His passing volume is going to sustain.
Owned in 71% of Yahoo leagues. Are you firing up Joe Burrow with more confidence than Gardner Minshew? Because I know Minshew was one of your favorite late round guys.
Yeah, this matchup, I'm gonna put Minshew outside the top 12, and then I'm gonna put Burrow inside the top 10. Honestly,
You have told me, you told me at least against Cleveland you were concerned about Joe Mixon, but what is your thermometer level, your panic meter on Joe Mixon now, and specifically in this matchup?
yeah, like I was just looking at the data here, Travian. Like it just looks like over the last 2 years with their new head coach, he's just become very game script dependent, right? It's like so he's RB 38 on the season. 79% of his fantasy points have actually come from just his rushing yardage because he's not being targeted and he hasn't found pay dirt yet. He has 9 targets versus Gio Bernard's 15. He has the second toughest rushing strength of schedule for the rest of the season. The reason why I wouldn't be too worried is because, listen, he's getting the volume, right? And we know that volume leads to production eventually. Like, it's going to balance out. We saw what Joe Mixon did last year, start off really slow, had a just fire burning, later half of the season. I think that could happen again. We see that Joe Mixon's received 6 red zone rushing attempts versus Gio's 1. So I think, if they get down there, that Joe Mixon's their guy. Again, volume will produce results. I would recommend if you're a Joe Mixon owner, just hang tight. Keep listening to this to our matchup show. I mean, if you guys heard week 2 matchup show, I kind of tempered expectations for Joe Mixon, and I'm a Joe Mixon owner as well in a couple leagues. I have a lot of equity in him, and I recommended sitting him, which I did. And I got out of that one unscathed. But you might not have the luxury to do that. But stick with Joe Mixon.
Cojones.
Yeah,
you might not have the cojones to do that. No, I want to ask you though. Would you trade Austin Eckler to get Joe Mixon?
I'm not sure I would. I just don't like the schedule ahead for Joe Mixon. That's the whole thing. I don't know if he can turn it around based off of his schedule, but he is getting the usage. I don't know if I would do that. I think that's like a lateral move, and I think you're going from one sticky situation to another.
So, I mean, when we look at the wide receivers, I kind of talked about it a little bit at the top. It's kind of a jumbled mess here. Do you have anything to provide Whisper Nation here from what you're seeing out of this wide receiving core?
Oh, boy, do I. Let's go. All right, so A.J. Green, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. So A.J. Green, listen, he leads the league in air yards by a mile. He has 338 air yards on the year. The second is Deshaun Jackson with 282. So he has a whole 56 air yards more than the number 2 wide receiver. He's 13th in average depth to target, 15.4 yards down the field. But he's just been really inefficient, right? Like, he just can't get separation. He's not producing. And a lot of people would indicate that, hey, listen, he's leading the league in air yards. He's bound to pop. I don't buy it, though, because he just can't come down with any catches. And we saw this offense last week. It shifted. The target distribution shifted. We saw Tyler Boyd get more targets. We saw T. Higgins get more involved. And I think they're realizing that, hey, we're just wasting drives targeting A.J. Green, whereas we could be going to other playmakers and we could be moving the chains a little bit more often. So
you saw T. Higgins get more involved last week. He had more snaps than A.J. Green. I think because of that.
100%. I totally believe that. And I think, Tyler Boyd as well. Like, if you look, I'll go into his target distribution in a second. But listen, with A.J. Green, if you can sell him, if you have someone in your league that's still high on him, that still expects a bounce back, sell him now. You don't want this headache for the rest of the year. All right. I know there's a voluminous passing attack, but I want nothing to do with a post 30-year-old wide receiver who's had nothing but injuries for the last 2 years, and he hasn't played football in a year and a half, 2 years, and it's just like it's showing on the field. And on top of that, I mean, if he can't produce against Trey Herndon this week, the sell window is going to close shut, and you won't be able to get anything for him in return. As far as Tyler Boyd goes, Johnny, to speak to your point. So Tyler Boyd last week, he saw 13 targets on 44 attempts. But the reason I was concerned for him in week 2 is because on 61 attempts, he only saw 8 targets and 13 of them went to A.J. Green, So I think this offense learned, hey, we need to target Tyler Boyd a little bit more. So that's encouraging to see. And I think that continues. And especially this week, I mean, he's going up against DJ Hayden in the slot. DJ Hayden has led up 92% catch percentage, which is second most amongst cornerbacks with 30 or more coverage snaps. He's DJ Hayden's also led up 2.17 yards per route run, which is 5th most amongst all cornerbacks and 3rd most amongst all nickel cornerbacks. So really juicy matchup with Tyler Boyd this week. And then T. Higgins as well. I think the breakout is real. I think T. Higgins was one of the most pro-ready prospects coming out in this wide receiver class. And, we see that translating to the field. He's second on the team amongst the wide receivers in red zone targets with 4 of them. He saw 3 of them last week and he converted 2. So we see this guy, he can make plays, and I think they're going to continue to trust him, and he's going to continue to get more involved. I love him as a waiver wire target this week to replace A.J. Green.
Are you starting any of these guys with confidence, Sammy?
Tyler Boyd, 100%.
Okay. And then on the wide receiving core for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I did just want to go back so you get one run through here quickly of that wide receiving core for Jacksonville.
Yeah, so Jacksonville, I mean, Cincinnati's allowed the 3rd least fantasy points to wide receivers, 22.7 per game. And again, I said it at the top of this matchup breakdown, Cincinnati actually ranks 3rd best in terms of pass coverage unit. DJ Chark, if he's healthy, you're starting him. You just have to. His draft capital warrants it. That's without a question. Keelan Cole, however, he was disappointing last week. So some people might be considering like, hey, do I drop this guy? I picked him up off of waivers. Is he worth me keeping him on my team? I would say, yeah. Don't drop him just yet. He has the softest matchup amongst all the Jacksonville wide receivers this week against Mackenzie Alexander. And I think this is a game where, he could bounce back a little bit. Just to kind of speak to Mackenzie Alexander, the nickel cornerback there in the slot, he's allowed 86% catch percentage. He's allowed 1.47 yards per route run, which is 9th most amongst all slot cornerbacks. So I like Keelan Cole this week. And if Chark is back this week, Chris Conley, he goes back to irrelevance. I'm not looking to start him, especially after last week. Laviska Shenault, though, he's interesting because he's second amongst Jacksonville wide receivers in terms of snap percentage. His role is growing. His targets have been increasing. And, this might not be the best spot for him this week, but I think he's definitely a hold. Hang on to him. I think he's going to continue to get more involved, especially with those rushing attempts. If he starts getting some goal line rushing attempts, that's going to be really juicy.
Johnny, do you agree with Summy and on a lot of fantasy football Twitter that James Robinson is locked into your lineup, especially this week?
Yeah, I definitely
believe it now.
Well, I mean, it's not. I never said I wasn't a believer in his talent. I think he's a good talent, but I do see that this is his workload. He had the best game last week. That's the best game. I would trade him, and that's my honest opinion. His next 3 weeks are great. He has a great matchup. Again, Houston, Detroit, and then the LA Chargers. Those are great games, but then after that it gets real brutal, and you're adding players as well onto that, and so I would trade him now while the stove is hot.
That's I just wanted to kind of just really quickly just bring this up because I saw this on Twitter. This is a really interesting conversation I think we need to have with our listeners as well. We're always concerned about buying low, selling high, where we forget the point of fantasy football is winning. It's not winning trades, it's winning, right? Yeah. If you have a guy that's producing that you picked up before week 1 off the waiver for completely free, and he's an RB2 every single week, especially with the COVID situation going on right now, especially with all the injuries to these star running backs, listen, if you have James Robinson, don't trade him. Like I would give you the opposite advice of Johnny. Like I'm on the opposite side of the fence. It's like, listen, you're
saying if someone came to you and said, "I'll trade you Austin Eckler right now for Robinson," you'd say no?
Well, that depends, right?
Well, no. So that's what we're throwing out. That's what we have to say. We have to say they're not getting nothing. I'm not saying go and give them away. It's saying that like people are going to legit say that this guy has been performing. He's an RB1 right now, an RB2. I will legit give you something in return. I'm going to say yes, take that. Even Austin Eckler, who I'm not a fan of, but I'll take Austin Eckler over James Robinson the rest of the year.
For sure. But the only reason I'm saying is like be hesitant to trade him is because listen, his advanced metrics are popping as well, right? He's 12th in terms of yards after contact per attempt, 3.42. He's right behind Clyde Edwards.
But they haven't faced anyone difficult. You can't throw out these things when I understand, like he's looked good, yes, but there are a lot of factors that are being are being thrown in right now that are not going to be that way moving forward, and that's what I'm saying. You need to proceed with caution.
We can't say that for sure. Like we're expecting Armstead and Ezigbo to come in and eat at that market share, but what if they come in and do exactly what Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland have done for James Conner, and that's be real actual spells? And then James Robinson, if he comes in and still has 55% of the market share and he's still getting 15 plus touches and he's still producing at an efficient clip, it's not really going to matter how many other backfield members that they have if he's still getting the majority of the work and performing at a similar level that he is right now.
History would tell us that Jay Gruden loves a workhorse running back, and he, that's exactly how he runs his offense. So he's found his guy. I do feel like, and Johnny, you said that they haven't played anyone difficult. They actually played Indy. I mean, like Indy's a pretty tough rushing defense there. Tennessee's
Week 1
not
when
that
no
bad
one knew
themselves.
about James Robinson. No one knew about it.
But I'm saying this in context of what you said. You said they haven't faced anyone difficult. I'm saying that they have actually, and James Robinson has still performed. Listen, the same time.
Wait, hold on. But then if you really want to bring that up, you're saying the reason he played so well, he got 100% of the snaps. Did he get 100% of the snaps last week? How about the week before? No. The answer is no. And so he's a diminishing product. He's a diminishing product who hasn't faced the most difficult schedule yet. And then you're saying don't trade him because they got him for free, when I can tell you that people are saying, hey, I got offered Austin Eckler for James Robinson. Do I do it? Hey, if I got offered Chris Carson for James Robinson, would you do that? Yes, I would. Like it. Yeah, of course. I'm not going to give him.
It all depends on context there. I mean, listen, if you're getting a Chris Carson, I would take Chris Carson over James Robinson for sure.
Yeah, and I think to both your guys' point, you're both right in a sense here, right? Like somebody's just saying don't overreact and trade all the way. And Johnny's saying, make sure you get value for guys that are diminishing products. I'll let you guys have it at it a little. Where I think Whisper Nation's going to appreciate that breakdown. And the James Robinson debate lives on for at least another week between Summy and Johnny.
No, it'll live on for 3 more weeks because it'll do well for 3.
I tweeted on September 4th. You can go on at Summy TFW. I tweeted on September 4th before the season started. I projected James Robinson to be a low-end RB2, high-end RB3 for the entire season. I'm still firmly standing by that, and I think he's going to provide season-long value. That's why I wouldn't say trade him.
All right, going to our next game, we have the Houston Texans hopefully hosting the Minnesota Vikings here in a 54-point over-under. As of this recording, this game is on schedule, but the NFL has said that they may move this game if they have to. They could move it to Monday. We could see it moved off the schedule to maybe later in the year. Just keep on, as Summy has said, Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, and understand what could happen in this one. So 54-point over-under. You've got Houston favored by 3.5 points. You like the over-under here. When we're taking a look at what's going on in the Minnesota offense, it hasn't been a lot, but there was some juicy stuff happening last week. Summy, what is your take on what Kubiak's got going for this Minnesota squad?
Man, Justin Jefferson. Like, look at that, right? Involvement. Like, inefficient offense. They just listen. They're going to be competitive though, because like Kirk Cousins, he's not as bad as he seems right now. I know there's not a hill that I want to die on, right? But Kirk Cousins, like we know what he can do. Like we know what he's done. We know what he is. We know what we can expect. I understand, his pass catching options are limited, but Justin Jefferson came out strong last week and he kind of introduced himself to the world. The running game, we saw Dalvin Cook kind of pick up speed last week as well. So I think this offense, as the season goes on, it's going to get better. And I think they're going to be competitive with a lot of teams that they face. But there's fantasy value to be had here. It's just going to be through 2 guys, I think, Thielen and Cook. That's about it.
Yeah, so we know we're locking Thielen and Cook in, right, Johnny? Is there anything else to be had? Do you buy the Justin Jefferson breakout here?
I mean, you're going to throw him on your bench. I like him as a waiver wire stash. We've seen that Diggs could produce as a nice wide receiver 2 or a flex option in this offense before. And so I don't think that that could be very different for Justin Jefferson. I do think it's going to be up and down. I don't think it'll be as consistent. Well, in that case, Diggs wasn't that consistent either. So I think you're okay. But in this game, I would look at him more as a flex option. I think you would probably be more so chasing points if you throw him in there this week. But if you are in a bind, if A.J. Brown doesn't play and DJ Chark doesn't play again, and you are sitting there saying, what do I do? I think that Justin Jefferson will get you, he'll see 7 targets and he could, get 60 to 80 yards.
Yeah, if you're going to throw that Hail Mary with Justin Jefferson, like this is the game to do it, right? 54-point over-under. I feel like against Houston, this could be a spot for him to actually roll on that momentum.
I want to make one quick point here. We're talking about Justin Jefferson. We talked about T. Higgins just a minute ago. We're going to be talking a lot of rookie wide receivers moving forward. And I'm just bringing this up because there's a bit of a sea change that's happening. I've been steering away from rookie wide receivers my entire fantasy football career over the last 10 years. Historically, they do not break 1,000 yards very often. But we're seeing right now true reliance on these rookie wide receivers, whether it's Justin Jefferson in Minnesota or it's Ruggs and Edwards over there in Las Vegas. Now it's T. Higgins in Cincinnati. These players are not just coming into the teams and learning how it goes. They're producing in the first half of the season. And I don't think it's a fluke. And so this Justin Jefferson, should you keep these guys in? I think we're looking at the talent, we're looking at the opportunity, and we're looking at who he's playing alongside. And I'm feeling more confident about starting these types of players than I have in the last 10 years.
From Houston's defense, which could be a good matchup for Jefferson to take advantage of, to Houston's offense, Johnny, the Houston Texans have had a brutal opening schedule that is now starting to open up. We knew this would happen. We thought when they were playing these first three teams, what is their identity? What's going on? But they did seem to open it up a bit against Pittsburgh, and I do have confidence that they'll do so against the Minnesota Vikings here, just because of the way the Vikings have been attacked through the air. Are you having the same kind of confidence this week with the Houston offense?
Yeah, I'm firing up Deshaun Watson. I think that right now is a great time to buy low on Deshaun Watson. They had a really difficult beginning of the schedule, but then you look at their next 4 games. You got Jacksonville, Tennessee, Green Bay, and Jacksonville again. And so none of those secondaries really scare you. They've been giving up a lot. And then you also look at, like, Deshaun Watson is the fourth highest quarterback pressured through the first 3 games, which isn't a surprise considering who they played, right? Kansas City, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh, some of the best defenses that we've seen so far through 3 weeks. So I do think that there's a huge opportunity for Deshaun Watson, and I'm firing him up in this game. Of course, anytime Minnesota is on the schedule, you're firing up that quarterback. And then I also like David Johnson in this game to he had a real nice, cutback for a touchdown last week. He hasn't been overly producing for fantasy owners. So I actually think he might be a potential buy low because people aren't super excited about him, but you'll start to see him start to improve as their schedule opens up.
Yeah, you look at this rush defense for the Minnesota Vikings, and they've actually been gassed just about as much as their pass defense, if not more. 31 ranked against the run, so you like what you see for David Johnson. When we look at the wide receivers, Johnny, we've seen a disappearing act in 1 week from Will Fuller in week 2, and then he gets a nice fade in the end zone, actually does what he's supposed to do, and is the wide receiver 1 for Houston. Are you confident with Fuller going forward, and do you see a path for success with any other pass catchers here?
Shockingly, I don't even know if Will Fuller is the wide receiver 1 there. You look at the target distribution there, and through so far, you have Will Fuller getting 18% target market share. You also have Brandon Cooks getting 18% market share there. And then Randall Cobb all of a sudden getting 14%. So it seems to be, Deshaun Watson is truly spreading the ball around, which kind of fits the bill for Bill O'Brien. That's what he wanted. He wanted a bunch of speedster that could generate yards after the catch. And that seems to be what he has so far. But I am the most confident in Will Fuller. We've always seen that connection between him and Watson, and I just think that they're starting to get warmed up. Will Fuller's still learning how to be the wide receiver 1 there, but I don't mind flexing Brandon Cooks and Fuller in this match. And if you need a deeper 14-16 teamer, Randall Cobb, if you want to throw him in there, because Minnesota's defense is just that bad.
Some of you have told Whisper Nation to kind of hold on Brandon Cooks. He did not get it done last week, was overthrown on the touchdown. How are you feeling about Brandon Cooks and Randall Cobb?
I love him. Going back to Johnny's point, he made a great point. I mean, Will Fuller, he came out week 1. We were like, oh my God, he's going to get all of DeAndre Hopkins' market share. And then after that, it's like, oh my God, Will Fuller disappeared. 0 targets. I think, it's getting easier to predict which wide receivers are about to have big games just based on, the amount of pressure that Deshaun Watson's going to face. Like against Minnesota, he's going to have all day to throw it. And I really do feel like those longer developing routes like Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, even Kenny Stills, to be honest with you, could break off a big play or two in this game. Randall Cobb is really that slot option that they've been looking to fill for the last couple of years. They tried with Kiki QT. They tried with a couple other guys back there. They also had Vincent Smith, and they had not Vincent Smith. They had I forgot who else it was, but they tried with a couple of guys. And Randall Cobb, the chemistry is kind of gelling between him and Deshaun Watson now, and I think he's his kind of get out of jail free card if there's a lot of pressure coming. So, in high pressure matchups like that, I would definitely look at starting Randall Cobb. But in matchups like this with no pass rush, I mean, give me all the deep threats in this offense.
I like how you broke it down there, giving the perspective. If there's a lot of pressure, you go with the slot options. Maybe David Johnson gets a bump in receiving. If there's not pressure, you're going with the deep stretching routes. I think that's a beautiful thing to lay out for Whisper Nation. So when you look at this one, fire up those deep threats. Going to our next game here, we have the Miami Dolphins hosting the Seattle Seahawks in a massive 54.5-point over-under. You've got Seattle favored by just under a touchdown at 6.5. Austin, when we look at this game, that Seattle offense is something to behold right now. What are you looking at when you see the Seahawks?
The thing I'm looking at the most, aside from the obvious just impressed, just sheer enjoyment of watching Russell Wilson play football right now and connecting with his two receivers, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. It's really fun to watch. That's obvious. The questions that come into this week is the running game. What's going to happen right now with Chris Carson, who's dealing with a knee sprain? How is Carlos Hyde going to come in there and take and fill those reps along with any of the other halfbacks that we might see? So I expect nothing to shift course in terms of the aerial assault. The ground game, though, is going to be different than what we've seen in the first 3 weeks. What do you think, though, on this one?
Yeah, no, I like how you broke that down there because obviously they're letting Russ cook. I mean, this guy rolls out of bed with 4 touchdowns. We understand that. You're moving on there. But I think it really does become a question with the Chris Carson injury. We saw this nasty injury. He avoided disaster here. He's only going to miss 1 to 2 weeks per Adam Schefter. And then Carlos Hyde is a guy I wrote about as the top waiver ad this week. And yes, it is a rental. I get that. But this is one of the best matchups. And then they get Minnesota next week. So you're going to have 2 spots you could potentially just be flexing or even RB2ing, if that's a word, Carlos Hyde here. And I know it's not sexy, but Carson saw a red zone target in every game. And the goal line back in this offense, you're going to want to have a piece of. I mean, you look at Miami, they've given up a rushing touchdown in every game this year so far. For God's sakes, guys, Sony Michel scored on them in week 1. So you like what you're seeing about what Miami does to the running back position because, yes, this game is a high over-under, but Seattle's still favored by a lot. So they could grind this game out at the end if they really needed to, and Carlos Hyde could stumble into a touchdown for you. Look, the wide receiving core, though, we know what we're getting with there. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. There's volume with Tyler Lockett, and he's still seeing deep balls as well. And then there's DK Metcalf, who's just the explosion in this offense. I mean, tied with Ridley for the most deep ball receptions in 5 and has the most deep receiving yards in the league with 220. You've got to be so stoked on DK Metcalf. Greg Olsen is a one that becomes a popular maybe streamer, especially if Dallas Goedert was out. But he leads this team in targets from the tight end with 12. But Disley and Hollister have both been involved. And it's going to be hard for me to project each week if you can trust him. He's only got 12% market share. You've got those other tight ends working in. I'm just not comfortable. I'd rather go with a more explosive Mo Alley Cox or even, a Drew Sample or something like that over a Greg Olsen because I just don't see the snaps and market share leaning his way.
Hey, one quick thing I just wanted to add on here because I know when I was first starting out in fantasy, and I learned very quick, hey, if a team is favored by a lot, you want to start up that running game, right? Like you alluded to with Carlos Hyde and Chris Carson. And, initially, I see a lot of people fretting starting the wide receivers because it's they're going to be up a lot. There's going to be running. The game script's going to be in the run game's favor.
That's how they're going to be up a lot.
Exactly. So I want to point that out to our listeners, to Whisper Nation here. I mean, the way that they get up a lot is by throwing the ball, right? That's how they're going to get up. And Russ has been cooking. So don't be afraid to start Tyler Lockett, who's in a smash spot this week, as well as DK Metcalf. They're going to get up big using these 2 guys.
Dude, I actually think that
Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf, you're assuming you can start those guys going forward. Once again, rolling out of bed, Russell Wilson with 4 TDs. That's usually 2 to DK and 2 to Tyler. No, I'm just kidding. But that's how it could end up any given week. Yeah, exactly. The other side of the ball is the Miami Dolphins here. And, we've seen this situation play out. But Austin, when you look at that offense, what are some of the biggest questions you've got going on there?
The questions for me, there's not a ton of questions right now. It really is if I start Gaskins or not. Do I start Myles Gaskin, who is getting the most touches, but he's really been allergic to the red zone work? Jordan Howard's dominating that and that alone. So my question marks would really come just from the running back position. And heck, if I needed to stream a quarterback, would Ryan Fitzpatrick be somebody that I could start in this matchup and feel all right about it? And honestly, given their pass defense in Seattle at the 19th in the league, I would feel okay about rolling Ryan Fitzpatrick out, given Devontae Parker is going to be the most healthy he's been all season. We saw Devontae Parker finish out last year as a wide receiver 1, and he's been dealing with a hamstring injury to start the year. He got that back in training camp. It hasn't kept him off the field minus that second half week 1 against the Pats, but he was still playing all right, and he's been dominating the market share. Preston Williams has not been bad at all coming in as a second-year player. And then the most exciting player over here, Mike Gesicki. I love talking about him on this show. It's a cheat code, as we call it. He lines up in the in the slot all of the time. Caught a touchdown pass last week. I think he's going to catch a lot of touchdown passes this season. And Miami is a sneaky, exciting team to me.
Yeah, I think if there's ever going to be a must start for Ryan Fitzpatrick, this is probably it. He's got back-to-back multiple touchdown games, so he's feeling good. You saw him look good with that chest hair out after the win against Jacksonville. Only Atlanta's given up more points to the QB on the season, and Seattle's given up 28.7 to the QB per game. You love that. Now, Devontae Parker, you mentioned, I think he's a must start here in this situation. No team's allowed more points to the wide receiver than Seattle. Miami has a no doubt number 1 wide receiver right now, and that's Devontae Parker. He's got 19% of the target market share. So I think the question for the passing game comes at Preston Williams, but I'm even comfortable going with him because Miami's going to need to pass to keep up in this game. And we just saw Michael Gallup explode, who was a number 2 wide receiver, maybe even a number 3 wide receiver for Dallas against the Seattle passing attack. The biggest question for me is Myles Gaskin. And I know you're going to want to start Gaskin. His production has been hard to ignore. He averages 5 receptions per game. He averages 81 scrimmage yards per game. But this Seattle team is actually a serious pass funnel. And not only that, like they're the number 1 ranked rush defense because everybody has to throw on them, right? So they're funneling to the passing defense. But then you see that all the goal line work goes to Jordan Howard here. So there's really not a lot of money touches for Gaskin in that red zone or goal line because they're going to Jordan Howard in some maddening split that Miami keeps doing here. So I would fade Myles Gaskin here. That's my personal take on that just because of the way this sets up. Mike Gesicki, though, leads the team in market share with 21%. He runs 78% of his routes from the slot, and he's essentially a wide receiver for this team because of the athleticism. Jamal Adams left that game last week for Seattle with a groin injury, and so you really like what Gesicki's going to be lined up against some linebackers here in this game and getting those mismatches. So I like Gesicki. I like the pass-catching options, and I love Fitzpatrick as probably a stream of the week here. If we move on to the next game, we've got another game that is under COVID watch here. We're going to see if this game happens, if it happens on Monday night, if they move the game or flex it in any way. It is the Tennessee Titans hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's a 47-point over-under, and you've got Pittsburgh barely favored by 1.5 here. If I look at this situation, I see teams here, Johnny, in Pittsburgh that seems to be rounding into form, getting a little bit better each week, putting weapons out there. What are you seeing out of Pittsburgh?
Man, they're starting to look like the old Pittsburgh Steelers of a few years ago. Definitely like what you're seeing from Ben Roethlisberger and this offense. There are some questions. James Conner seems to be the guy. It's his job as long as he's healthy. It seems to be his. But there is some noise rumbling behind him as well, and it will be interesting to see if Deontay Johnson can go this weekend. He got a concussion in last week's game, came out in the first quarter. And so if he can get back on the field, I would presume he's a must start if he can get back on the field. But if not, Claypool and Washington become interesting. So I want to ask Summy, where does he think that this would go? If, one, for the running back, if you want to try to handcuff your running back with James Conner. And two, if Deontay doesn't give it a go, who are you willing to throw out there, if anybody, as that other wide receiver?
Yeah, I think Anthony McFarland is definitely very interesting. Showed a couple of his talents, I guess you could say, last week with some explosive runs. 6 for 42. Benny Snell just hasn't looked good. He's made some errors. So I think Anthony McFarland, if you're the Connor owner, scoop him up. And if Deontay sits, like if he's still in the concussion protocol, if this game is played as intended, as expected on Sunday at 1 p.m., I mean, listen, if Deontay can't go, Chase Claypool, he led all wide receivers in snaps and routes run last week. So Chase Claypool is just trending up. I think he's like third in terms of like yards per route run amongst all wide receivers or something like that. And he's just shown his efficiency. So definitely fire up Chase Claypool, and I would recommend picking him up. But I'm going to spin this back over to Austin over here. Austin, can you tell us a little bit more about like some of these pass catchers? Like, what do you feel about Big Ben? What are you feeling about the other side of the ball?
I think Big Ben's figuring it out, and I'm echoing a lot of the points that Travis has made about that Tommy John arm right now being stronger than it was before, and his overthrows on his deep ball will accredit to that increase in strength.
Hope so.
And maybe just a little bit of rust coming back, but I think that a strong arm and an experienced QB like Ben Roethlisberger indicates he's going to get it figured out here sooner than later. I love the combination of weapons that this Pittsburgh Steelers team has. We mentioned a lot of wide receivers, right? We've obviously got Juju and Deontay Johnson. We've got Claypool in Washington. Claypool gives me a little bit of a pause given his performance last week, just 1 for 4 on 24 yards for week 3. That doesn't get me super stoked, but if Deontay Johnson is out with that concussion, definitely more appeal over on that side. Eric Ebron, 12 targets in the last 2 weeks. He is a weapon. He's not being overly utilized. Nobody on this team is really being overly utilized, and I think that's a good balance from the Pittsburgh team. And Big Ben's going to have room to keep getting better. We're looking at him right now, number 10 pass blocking efficiency for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's the number 16 clean pocket throwing quarterback. Right now, he's just 2 for 10 on his deep balls. That's the biggest concern right now. He's missing even more than Justin Herbert is missing. But again, I'm going to go ahead and credit that to that crazy strong arm that he's just not used to dealing with at the moment. That's going to get figured out, and his rapport with his wide receivers is going to continue to gel. And it's tough for me to say which halfback is over McFarland or Snell. McFarland played better last week, going 6 for 42 versus 7 attempts for just 11 yards from Benny Snell. But we did see what Benny Snell did in week 1 when Connor was relegated to the sidelines, and he beasted out. So it'd be tough for me to say which is the backup. Good thing we don't have to say that, because right now we know that it is James Conner.
You got to earn your job every week. That was week 1, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the case, right? And then he put the ball on the ground the following week.
Yeah.
So you don't like that out of Benny Snell. So I like what you said there, Sammy, about picking up McFarland if you have stake in James Conner. We know we're starting James Conner. We know we're starting Juju. And you're most likely starting Ben. Although he's been on the borderline of a startable QB, this should be an okay matchup. I think to Johnny and Sammy's point, if Deontay can't go, you're starting Claypool over Washington. But if Deontay goes, it's Juju and Deontay for me here. And I think that's kind of where it's at. Do we have trust in Eric Ebron? I know he got a touchdown last week, but do we trust him in any kind of streaming capacity this week?
I do. I think
gross.
I think just if you watch on the field, I think the chemistry between him and Ben, it's growing week in and week out. Last week was his first touchdown, and we saw what he did in Indianapolis. And I'm super excited about Eric Ebron's touchdown upside as like a boom bust option as at tight end. Listen, I know there's a lot of breakout tight ends this year, but if you're a Goddard owner, if you're just in a tough pickle, Eric Ebron, you can do a lot worse. You can pick up a Greg Olsen. I think that's worse. That's a worse option than Eric Ebron. So if he's on your waiver and you need to start him, you can.
The Tennessee Titans might find themselves in a tough pickle as they have tested positive for many coronavirus tested positive on a few coronavirus cases within their organization. But when I look at this top-level view, we've got Ryan Tannehill hit and miss at the quarterback position. We've got Derrick Henry getting into the end zone finally last week, and his GMs can finally kind of exhale in this one. And when will we see A.J. Brown? So, Austin, when I look at this Tennessee Titans team, like, you got to help me make some sense of what's going on with this squad here.
Derrick Henry is going to be force-fed all season long. His carries have been like 1990s football type of carries. We're looking at, 20, 25, 30 types of carries. It's crazy. It's something I didn't think we were ever going to see again in the NFL, to be honest. And Derrick Henry is a different type of player, and he's getting different types of looks. Ryan Tannehill is the number 13 quarterback on the year. He's got 809 touchdowns, 809 yards.
Whoa, oh my God. Russell Wilson, step aside. Here comes Ryan Tannehill.
Pretty efficient on his deep ball. Speaking of, 5 of 6 on his deep ball attempts. He's the number 11 in the clean pocket. Ryan Tannehill is producing pretty well for the Tennessee Titans. It's a well-rounded team. Corey Davis is going to be filling in while A.J. Brown's bone bruise continues to keep him on the sidelines. Corey Davis isn't doing bad work. Last week, 2 red zone targets. He was 5 for 6, 69 yards for the former number 5 overall pick. Adam Humphries is going to be getting a bump up as A.J. Brown is going to be still out. The real beneficiary here, though, is Jonnu Smith, who maintains his top-level tight end status going into week 4. He's the number 2 tight end on the year. Last week, 5 of 8 for 61 yards, 13 targets over the last 2 weeks. I don't see that slowing down. And we know the Pittsburgh Steelers are a really mean defense. If there's a susceptible area to hit them, it's going to be through the air. They rank number 23 in pass defense compared to the number 2 overall rush defense. So I'm feeling okay about my pass catching options for Tennessee, considering I expect the Titans to be down and having to play catch up. You're still not benching Derrick Henry, so it doesn't really matter from your running back perspective. I'd feel decent even going up against Pittsburgh with your pass catchers.
One thing I just want to add here.
That.
I just wanted to add, I mean, with the COVID scare, we don't know the players that were affected, right? So it could be any one of these guys. It could be all these guys. Like, we don't know. But the team's going to have to add those players to the COVID injured reserve list. So definitely keep your eye out for that. You know, if it's a Derrick Henry, like Darrington Evans, like pick him up, right? Like some of these guys, like you're going to
contact tracing will be important too, right? So we'll have to understand if Derrick Henry was around Darrington Evans because they're in the same position group and he gets marked on the list, we may have a situation where Darrington Evans ends up on the list too. So we'll just see how both of these teams, Tennessee and Minnesota, have their position groups lined up, which positions were affected. So just do us all a favor, and both of these games are slated for Sunday, and look at your lineup. By then you should know. Look at your lineup. Just do that skim down and say, do I have a Tennessee player? Do I have a Minnesota player? What's going on with them? I need to check on them. And I love that you brought that up, Summy, because it's going to be a big part of this weekend's games, no matter what happens with what's going on. So you'll want to check that out. All right, that wraps it up for this week's matchups here. That was the Week 4 Part 1 matchups. As always, if you want to follow us on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, you can search the Fantasy Whisperers there. And we will be back with you for Part 2 of the Week 4 matchups. So for Johnny Game Time Hicks, for Summy, for Austin, I am Big Travie. We are the Fantasy Whisperers. Peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Whisperers podcast. You can hear more from John and Travis on Google Play, SoundCloud, and iTunes. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at TF Whisperers.